And we are live. Tonight we have a very special treat for those of you who've been paying attention with my intense rivalry with the Answers from Reason crew. Tonight we are going to take these so-called questions and basically annihilate them, basically destroy them. Joe's been mouthing off about these questions for a long time, so we're finally going to settle some old scores and put it to rest. But as a special favor to you, the audience, tonight John is actually going to take over, and he is going to be officially running the annihilation because we wanted to keep it fair. You know, there's a lot of personal animosity between me and the Answers from Reason crew, so we want to have John do the. We're going to destroy them, but he's going to be running it so that it does, so people don't think, well, Craig is really biased against those guys because of, stuff that's been going on personally. So
there we go. All the blowback just goes to me. That way you're able to that was John that did that.
Upset with anything I say about the atheist community, blame John.
Just at me on Twitter, at Writer John Buck. I mean, it seems like every other problem that happens on your channel I get blamed for anyway, so. All right.
Well, that's the whole point of having someone assist you on a channel. So, John. Somebody you don't want on the channel is like, Craig, I want to be on your channel. Oh, yeah, talk to John.
Yeah. Let's see. Joe from Answers in Reason, I think about a week ago, he posted this 10 questions for theists, just sort of laying them out. They're some fairly simple ones, but also interesting. And I'm excited. I mean, I actually haven't listened to any of the other responses, aside from a small portion of S.J. Thomason's earlier this morning. So I'm actually kind of interested in seeing what all the other theistic responses are to the questions. But I have the video hooked up on here. And then after this, so actually just 2 days ago, I think, Emerson also put out a video, maybe a little bit more than that. 7 questions specifically for Christians. So we'll actually be responding to both of those in this video. And they'll be in the description of the video below. So if you guys want to watch those yourself, you can. But let's get this show on the road, actually. All right. So we're starting first with Joe's 10 questions for theists.
Hey folks, Joe from Answers in Reason here, doing something a little bit different. Seeing as we've responded to a number of different videos of the 10 questions for atheists type kind, both from theists and atheists, we thought it might be fun to actually ask some of the questions ourselves rather than answer them. We do really care about the responses, and hopefully we can create a little mini-series out of them. Question 1. If you are a religious theist, what religion are you? And what do you feel unifies folks of your faith? If you're some form of secular theist, which God do you believe in, and why don't you adhere to any religion?
All right, so I don't think either of us are secular theists, so we probably won't respond to the second question. But yeah, if we're religious theists, what religion are you? And what do you think unifies those within that particular religion? Caleb, you want to answer first?
So I'm a Roman Catholic, and wait, can you put that back up?
Yeah. Sorry. Let me see. There we go. Yeah.
What do I feel unites folks of my faith? I mean, I would say our beliefs. I don't know. I don't really have a lot to add on this one. I would just say especially the creedal beliefs and beliefs in Christ and God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say at least for Christianity, maybe the Nicene Constantinople Creed, that might be sort of at least your general cohering sort of set of beliefs that sort of contain all of Christians, while also potentially excluding certain other sects that might want to call themselves Christians.
Excluding the heathen Christian, the bad Christian.
yeah, exactly. I'm a Catholic as well. I just entered into the church this Easter. What would I say unifies Catholics? I guess a sort of belief in, I guess, submission to the Roman Pontiff, the successors to Peter as Bishop of Rome. Craig, I think there's like a clicking.
Yeah, that's static. You can hear that static, right? That's why I
Yeah.
have my mic heated.
Okay. Yeah. There you go. I would say that's probably the primary belief, doctrinal belief that separates papists from non-papists. So that seems sufficient, at least as the sort of unifying aspect. That so those Christians that believe that there is some head over the ecclesial church that is sort of has the authority and the right to sort of make decisive decisions regarding how the Christianity should be practiced in the church. And so, Orthodox, they might agree with Catholics regarding like the role of tradition, and Protestants might agree with Catholics in regards to the deity of Jesus Christ. But there's going to be that, I guess, dividing sort of element there regarding how they view the Pope or the successors to Peter through the line and what authority that they have. What about you, Craig? What religion are you?
How bad is the clicking?
So long as you mute yourself when you're not talking, I think it should be fine.
Okay. Because it's really bad here. Like it's constantly clicking. Technically, I was raised a Roman Catholic, but I didn't really practice. We were nominally Catholic growing up, so I was baptized into Roman Catholicism, but I didn't really believe it, and nobody in my family necessarily believed it either. It's like, we went to church on Christmas and Easter. So when I was in high school, I was kind of an agnostic, and then I became an actual Christian when I was 29, where I went to church and had a religious experience. And what I technically am is a non-denominational. It's kind of a lot of people call it different things, and it's hard to qualify because if you say charismatic, some people think you mean this, and if you say Pentecostal, some people think you mean this. But it was a Malibu Vineyard church. That probably means something to some people. That's it's technically non-denominational, like that's what I am, but I'm also kind of officially Catholic. Like I was baptized into Catholicism, I just didn't practice it per se. I mean, I even got confirmed in it, but wasn't something I really cared about. It was just sort of something I did, performed. Didn't believe it, didn't even think about it when I was a kid.
Right. Yeah. Okay, we can move on to the question number 2. No, you just got here on time, Spartan. We're just starting, so we've only destroyed the first question so far. So we'll get into the more meaty desolation about to take place.
The destruction the destruction grows slowly. Like it will wind up annihilating by the end. So far,
yeah, exactly.
We're holding our firepower back a little too.
Yeah. Actually, I'm wondering, Craig, if maybe rejoining the StreamYard group that might help your audio issue. I'm not sure. That at least sometimes help with other programs.
So quit, leave the group, and
then I'll invite you back on.
You're gonna let me back in if I do that, right?
Yeah, I will. It'll show up on the bottom here.
You promise?
Yeah.
You promise you'll let me back in?
Yeah. Yes, I will. I swear.
I know last time I don't think you did, but all right.
All right, so we finally got Craig out of here. Now we can just zoom through these. Let's see. I guess while we're waiting, because he just watched these questions earlier this morning, so he'll know what this question is. We'll go ahead and play it for the audience while he's rejoining.
Question 2. If there was any religion that was completely different to your own, that you could choose to be true and proven to be true to the entire world, which would it be? Now, I'm not talking about a denomination that you see quite as different as yours. If you're a Christian, don't pick another form of Christianity or even Judaism. Think about something really out there like ancient Norse mythology or Hinduism.
All right, so that is question 2. If there was one religion completely different to your own that you could choose to become true, what would it be and why? I guess for myself, I haven't thought about this too much, but I've at least been somewhat like fascinated in Hinduism, which he actually brings up there at the end. not necessarily because I'm like super familiar with it. I just find that like, I don't know, I guess mythological scale, I guess, to Hinduism is quite interesting. Like this notion that there is sort of this whole hierarchy of beings besides humans and angels, and there's actually like gods and demigods and broader scales. I guess like I'd at least be interested in Hinduism, and I think it might be able to like be able to have a large metaphysical worldview picture that manages to sort of satisfy a lot of the needs that human beings have, and also as a sort of philosophical system. I think it has some strong weight to it, especially since I think some versions of Hinduism do accept classical theism, but they'll probably be more non-personalistic in it than even classical theists like Catholics are, or Jews or other classical theists. Yeah, it would be a much more sort of neutral, I guess, grounding of being rather than a more personal grounding of being that Christianity tends to favor. I guess maybe like the Greek pantheon, that might be an interesting, I guess, element, an interesting religion that I think might be interesting to be if it were true. But that's just me.
How's the clicking? Is it better?
Yeah, I think it's better.
I put my headphones in. Maybe that will make a difference.
Okay, I'll go. I don't really want another religion to be true, so I don't have a good answer here. But I do find Hinduism to be interesting, like you said, John, in that it has, ancient roots, so that at least, has something going for it in that regard that I find interesting. And it's like, it's still a major world religion, but yeah, I don't find things that I don't think are true. Like I don't wish they were true, so I don't have a strong preference here.
I'm somewhat sympathetic to, prior to me becoming a Christian, I was really interested in Taoism, and I'm also sympathetic to perennialism. And actually, I thought Hinduism was a good answer, John. That was a halfway decent answer. I thought the Taoism is just pure philosophy. Was always. I don't know if I would say I would want it to be true, or I think there's truth in it, because that's kind of why I was interested in it. It's more of like, the Tao is the way, and it's kind of like you could even say like the Tao is physics, and you make sort of your peace, you reconcile yourself with the way the world actually is in some ways. So I think there's stuff about it that I like and I'm partially sympathetic to, and I thought was cool and interesting. And then the spiritual aspects of Hinduism, the same idea. There's aspects of Hinduism and perennialism that I'll even see now and be like, yeah, that makes sense to me. So those would be my three answers.
Yeah. And I guess I will say one thing, like I think for Hinduism, it's one thing that's, I guess, been sort of a blockade for me, and even like taking it as a live option, is just how sort of foreign it is, I guess, to my more Western and cultured mindset. I'm sure there are plenty of like Western-minded people that became Hindus.
You've watched Arayuna's channel, right? Where
yeah,
because the guy who we had on who debated Matt Dillahunty is technically a Hindu, but he's very general Westernized, and it's more philosophical philosophy of religion, and he's influenced by a lot of the same stuff, a lot of the same like Jordan Peterson type stuff that we talk about all the time. So
that is cool. Yeah, and I guess there is a strong like intellectual background even within Hinduism, that like there is plenty of like various sects within Hinduism that were sort of like philosophically competing against each other regarding like how best to understand God and the gods and their religious texts and things like that. So yeah, there's definitely a lot more to it than I probably am even fully aware of course, that actually probably deserve quite a bit more care, or I guess research on.
Yeah, no doubt. There's a whole school of epistemology associated with it that's different, and there's
Oh, wow.
They were the first quantum physicists in some ways. The Vedanta Hindus were, at least.
Yeah.
They were the first idealists. They were the first. They were very similar to the German idealists. Were influenced by them.
Yeah. Spartan theology is saying Greek pantheon would be horrible to be true. The gods can be unpredictable and petty.
Yeah,
I
that's
guess
called fun. That's called fun, Spartan.
yeah.
That's like their rock star gods. Like, oh, I decided to wipe out your city today.
Yeah, I guess if you take like the stories about the gods to be like literal, but I would imagine that like more intellectually minded believers in the Greek pantheon would just think that like there's a sort of personal being that is related to, I don't know, the warfare. And so that when you're in that mode of warfare, you're
Right.
in a
Then you're
sense
channeling the
worshiping
god
that
of
being.
war.
Yeah. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly how it is.
And then that way it wouldn't be like, oh, Mars is this sort
capricious,
of unpredictable.
mean god.
Yeah, exactly. It's just that when you're acting like Mars, you're in a sense worshiping him and embodying him. But
I'm sure there's some sort of coherent rhyme or reason to the pantheon of Hindu gods too. There's some sort of coherent psychological underpinnings to why Shiva and why this, and in the same sort of way that you just said.
I'm sure that's probably right. All right, question 3, I think.
Question 3. What's your favorite verse or story from your holy book? Question 4.
Okay, that's quick. How about you, Craig? Let's see if I can.
Well, the verse I quoted this morning, the one is, "All things work together for good to those who love the Lord and are called according to his purposes." That's what's written on my wife's mother's gravestone. And that's something we've used a lot in our family. Just that's one. The favorite story may be either the washing of the feet or the Good Samaritan. And then I'll keep thinking while you guys are talking. Those are the first that come to mind. And the fool says in his heart, there is no God.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, that's my favorite. What's the one about how atheists are all going to burn in hell? That's my favorite.
That's a good one too. That's one of my favorites. And yea, they will be smoten with great wrath and furious anger. The one from Pulp Fiction. That's also my favorite.
I don't really have a definitive favorite, but I do right now like the parable or story that Jesus tells about the woman who gives the one coin to the temple, and it's like, and he says it's worth more than the people that were giving lots of money but had more left over. So like it's in Mark 12, but that's the one I'll pick for now.
That was one of the recent readings in Mass, actually. Yeah, that story. It's funny. The homily is always related to giving to the church and tithing and everything like that afterwards. That's how it seems like a lot of entryways in. But yeah, it's a good story. I guess I don't know. The verse that I've always been like deeply connected to is actually similar to yours, Craig. It's in Genesis, very like last chapter of Genesis, 50 verse 20, where the Joseph's brothers are like begging for forgiveness from Joseph for treating him poorly now that he's sort of taken up this position of authority and rank. And then Joseph, in verse 20 it says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." There's this kind of interesting fact about God that like as the greatest conceivable being or greatest possible being, that even from actions that are explicitly like immoral or what should not be done, God can still bring goodness out of that. That's sort of like Aquinas and Augustine's sort of answer to the problem of evil, that even out of evil, goodness can be brought out. So I don't know. I sort of touched on that verse as a sort of touchstone. As for like a favorite story, I guess, or passage from Scripture, I just like Genesis a lot. Like I kind of feel like the stories of the patriarchs are kind of like the, I don't know, the Iliad and the Odyssey. These sorts of more mythological or like larger than life sort of stories that are out there that you can kind of like really sink your teeth into and appreciate the like layers of symbolism there. But yeah. Right. Let's see.
Story from your holy book. Question 4. If there was one thing you could choose not to be true about your religion, what would it be? As an example, the other day someone told me on Twitter that they wished pets would go to heaven with them.
Okay. Yeah, if there was one thing you could change or that would
one's
be
kind of
true
a-
about your religion.
That
Yeah.
one's kind of a weird one because, as I was saying this morning, like I'm agnostic on some of the things that like people would definitely probably say, like, you know, that like the first thing a lot of people say is that non-believers perish. I don't necessarily believe that, and I don't necessarily believe that pets don't go to heaven either. You know, I kind of think that they probably do. I don't know that they don't. I'm sort of agnostic on it. I don't really have a strong, firm opinion about, you know. So I'm not really sure if I can answer that. Let me hear what you guys answer first. Does that make sense? What I just said? You understand what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah. So like so what I would say is kind of in conjunction with that is like, I wish though that there wasn't this tradition of some of those unpleasant things. Like I
ideas.
wish there wasn't a tradition of like this strong inerrancy about the Bible, or this eternal conscious torment view of hell. So I don't hold those views, but I recognize that a lot of Christians have and do, including in Catholicism. So I wish that wasn't a strong tradition, even though I think they are debatable how to understand them and such. But it's true that there is a tradition of them. So I wish that
Yeah,
was.
that's a really good point. I kind of agree with that. I would think of it the same way.
Yeah. I
Because
guess
I'm agnostic about the actual things, but they definitely are a tradition within Christianity. So I probably agree with that.
Yeah. I guess there's a way in which you can answer where like, oh, there's all these historical facts about like what Christians have done, particularly like when they were in power, and how they treated like other Christians or non-Christians, that I'd wish that were not true. Like that would at least make being a Christian not as horrendous.
So you wish
especially-
there wasn't like a Spanish Inquisition?
I don't know about that, but like, yeah, there's definitely like different like abuses of power that have definitely taken place within Christian and Catholic history.
That's kind of weak, John.
But
how are you going to
I know.
find out who the heathen are without a Spanish Inquisition?
Fair. But I think what Joe's question is probably more to do with is like, what doctrinal positions do you wish were not?
Well, he's kind of asking it in a weird way, like we actually think that it's true of our belief, and we wish it were. Like God is going to punish the non-believer, and we wish he weren't, because we're nicer than God. But
Well, I think so. It's open to how you interpret it. Like,
yeah, I will say that like I wish that there was a better opening within, particularly the Catholic Church, in sort of welcoming in current non-believers. Like, if there was a way in which like there's a way in which like non-believers could be technically part of the church despite not being in full communion with the rest of the believers there, like if there was still a desire within their hearts to sort of be part of God's church, even though they're not in a position in which they can confidently assert that God does exist. I think that would be like, whether they're agnostic or even atheist, like if there was a way in which they could be included within the church at this point in time. Now, it wouldn't be the case that they could like take the sacraments or anything like that. I'm pretty sure that a sacrament, in order to be taken in good conscience, should be done with all the appropriate beliefs behind the sacrament. But yeah, if there was a way that like they could be, I guess, Christian light in a sort of sense.
Yeah, like honorary
exactly,
members, like church, friends of church, or members in good standing, but not actual Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Emerson saying, "Isn't that just being a Catholic?" Yeah, I mean, in a sense, there are quite a few.
Well, it's
Quite a
not
few.
like
It's called a
people aren't
lapsed Catholic.
no.
It's,
But it's not like people aren't allowed to go to church and things, but if you don't believe it, you're probably not going to be as involved. But I mean, I think I get what your point is.
Yeah, just being able to be part of the church, even though they're not technically in full
like
perfect communion.
take half communion or do like
No.
I don't know, but yeah, just maybe a more welcoming attitude towards those that are currently in a position of not being confident in asserting God's existence. That would be something I'd wish were true, but currently it's not. All right.
Pets would go to heaven with them. Question 5. What are some of the worst arguments you hear us atheists making?
Well, there is this YouTube channel that is just full of like horrible atheist arguments. It's called Answers and Reason. It's pretty
slam.
Yeah, I mean,
Dang,
all
that's
these
even-
fallacies, they're always making fallacies left and right.
Yeah. The fallacy, this fallacy, that crew. That's what they're like. Every
Yeah.
time you talk to them, oh, that's the no true horseman fallacy. That's the no.
Yeah, that's actually a good actual answer. Yeah, like whenever you're trying to talk to somebody about like a various argument for God's existence, and then they'll assert that there's some sort of fallacy that the argument is making,
Yeah.
without like really considering the argument, and like it's
That
almost
happened-
like they look at the argument in order to like associate some sort of fallacy to it, and then they'll just blindly sort of label that fallacy according to the argument. Yeah, that is
Yeah,
a very
that's a
frustrating
great
form of
one.
argumentation.
That happened to me on Twitter with one girl who had just recently deconverted. And then the second I was talking to her, she was like, sounds like the no true Scotsman fallacy. And it didn't apply. She was just trying to make it apply so that she could kill the conversation. The other one that happens a lot is the got any evidence? I said evidence. That's not evidence. Rinse, repeat. Got any evidence? I said evidence. That's not evidence. Rinse, repeat. Where they're just trying to like use the burden of proof to really just kill a conversation so that they won't. There's no actual dialogue going on between something the Answers from Reason crew actually never does, by the way, just so you know, just to be perfectly fair. But just so they use that thing to just try and score fake points against you and not really, listen or engage with.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I would say to kind of add on to that is something that bugs me is like, just like we all recognize, or at least should recognize, that arguments have limitations and maybe it takes more unpacking and such. But like if an argument doesn't like prove everything, it doesn't make it worthless. It's like, oh, you present this argument. It's like, oh, well, that doesn't prove every single thing you believe. Like, does it prove God's a Trinity and all this? It's like, well, of course not. But it's like,
oh yeah,
well, at least examine the merits the argument might have. And I'm not saying a lot of atheists do that, but there are some who do.
But like after you lay out a sort of general argument for theism, and then they're like, well, that doesn't prove the God of your particular religion.
Right. It's just like, it's just like the which God type objection, but obviously it can be put in different forms. But it's like, well, of course, like nobody thought that this argument, proved, specific understandings about God or even all of God's attributes, but it could still be a plausible, stepping stone, etc., in favor of theism and religious belief.
Yeah. Are you back, Craig?
Yeah, back. I got bounced out. That wasn't even a phone call. That was just sometimes my phone is really finicky with StreamYard.
Yeah. All right.
Making. Question 6. If there was a behavior from your fellow theists that you wish you could change, what would it be and why?
All right. I will say that, like, at least for me, I wish there was a more open attitude towards discussion of evolution within Christianity. Like for myself, I was kind of more, I don't know, this might be only something that I happen to particularly be involved with, but like in my journey of like considering religion from a more intellectual point of view, I was doing it from within a sort of like Darwinian sort of framework, or understanding how religiosity is involved with a Darwinian evolution. And so it was really frustrating to me, like trying to talk about these sorts of things with very, very committed Christians, but without that sort of ability to talk within that sort of language as well. And it's not, I don't know, and I don't know, something that also put me off Eastern Orthodoxy in my consideration of it between that and Catholicism was it seemed almost like there is an a priori commitment to reject evolution, at least within some strands of Eastern Orthodoxy. There are certainly very intellectual Eastern Orthodox Christians that are committed or like willing and accepting of the facts of evolution without that intruding at all with their faith. But I at least noticed, I guess, on a sort of colloquial level, that there is this sort of tension, like extreme tension between sort of an evolutionary history to humanity in conjunction with Christianity. So that's like one behavior that I wish would be changed in the Christian
Yeah, that makes
spheres.
sense.
Just a better openness, especially since I think that a lot of young people are just faced with this dilemma of like, okay, well, either evolution is true or
I can
Christianity
either
is
be a
true.
Christian or believe in science, but I can't be both.
Yeah,
Anything but the
exactly.
science. And in keeping with that same idea, which I didn't say earlier, but I wish that there was no preemptive, like you can't believe X and still be a Christian with anything. I think that there isn't, like, there's a lot of people who try to make rules about, well, you can't be a Christian and not believe that the Bible's inerrant, which isn't a hard fast rule. You can't be a Christian and not believe in, this type of historicity of the Bible. I wish that there was.
Yeah. Well, he just we destroyed him, Caleb.
Yeah, well, to build upon that, like kind of a similar sentiment, like I just wish that more Christians were informed on some of the topics and were more like open-minded, like aware of the complexities. Like, it's just like whether it's evolution or the Bible or like, that atheists can have like sophisticated reasons. It's not just about like, the common stereotypes. It's just kind of a frustration. Like if you're not involved in like apologetics and philosophy, there's just like a lot of ignorance from some people, which can be kind of understandable, but it's unfortunate because like they really should be more informed about things, and unfortunately a lot of people aren't.
Yeah. And of course, as a Catholic, I think I wish that the Catholic abuse scandal had happened differently, so that like there wasn't these priests that were just being shifted around instead of actually being taken to custody, and just a lot of misjudgments and immoral actions that were taking place within the institution itself, which is definitely certain behaviors that I would wish would happen differently. But all right, Craig will be back in a bit, I'm sure.
What would it be and why? Question 7. What movie do you feel gives the most accurate representation of your faith?
What would you say, Caleb? I know you're a big fan of The Passion.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, The Passion's the movie that I think is the most inspiring and like the best representation of the gospel, but like the best representation of like my actual faith life. I would probably pick the movie Doubt, if you've seen that.
Mm-hmm.
And not because I'm like I relate to the actual events in the movie, because it's very specific scandal and such, but just the complexity of the characters, and like I don't know, that's just kind of how the vibe that I get. Like you have like some people that are really extreme, like I don't know, you just kind of have to watch the movie, but it represents different kind of what we've been talking about, how there are Christians who are more like maybe rigid or dogmatic, and then there are others that are maybe questionable in their behavior, and then there are others that are kind of clueless.
Yeah.
Well,
That's a real good one too. It's got
Yeah.
like a star-studded cast of
Yeah.
Philip
No,
Seymour
it's a great-
Hoffman,
yeah,
Meryl
it's a great
Streep,
movie.
Amy Adams. Yeah, that's a good
What
one.
movie was that?
Doubt. It's
I haven't
about
seen that.
yeah, it's about a sort of scandal that takes place in a Catholic school.
That's a good
and
answer.
the mystery behind it. Yeah. What did you? So the question was, what religion or what movie sort of best represents your faith? What would you say, Craig? You're the movie guy on here.
Well, one of the movies that's actually most people don't think of as Christian is Dead Man Walking. And it's actually the story. It was Sean Penn. I think he won the Academy Award for it. And it's the story of it's based on a true story where he kills a couple people and he's like a young white trash guy. And then a nun comes to try and lead him to the Lord before he's on death row. And most people don't think of it as a Christian movie because it was directed by Tim Robbins. So it's kind of got like a left-wing anti-death penalty spin, but it's actually a really good Christian story. I mean, it's based off of her memoirs, and it's the story of bringing this guy to salvation right before he, meets his maker. So I thought it was actually really, really cool. That's one. What was your answer, John? Did I already miss your answer?
No, I haven't said it yet. Something that really
Jaws.
yeah, Jaws. No, Back to the Future Part 3. That's my that I think best represents my faith. No, there's the movie Silence by Martin Scorsese. That was
Yeah, I've never seen that. I know about it.
Yeah, it's good. It's really I don't know, in a sense like faith challenging, I guess. But I was I don't know, really I guess sort of inspired, but also like I don't know, it's hard to sort of express myself how important that sort of film is, and I think that it does raises a lot of those like hard questions as a Christian, especially given the sort of observation of all this needless suffering that takes place because you're a Christian, and it's a really like hard moral dilemma that the characters are faced with, and it's not like easily sort of to respond to. It's yeah, it raises a lot of like tough questions, and I think that's a good sort of way to be a Christian, is to always be wrestling with these sorts of hard questions and trying to have a moral resolve despite all these hardships that you're going through. That would be at least
That's a good answer.
yeah, I really like that film.
One of the best, just as a side note, one of the best atheist movies is The Seventh Seal. The Ingmar Bergman, famous with the knight plays chess with death. And basically the premise is kind of the silence of God. It takes place during the plagues in Europe. And there's a whole, it's not quite an atheist movie. It's kind of a seeking God movie, but the implication is there's, God is silent because of a reason that there isn't one. Not just that he's mad at John again.
At me.
What
I do. Let's see. There's also this I don't know. I at first didn't really think of it as like a Christian movie. But from a YouTube channel that's like does video essays called Logos Made Flesh. They did this video essay on the Shawshank Redemption and sort of the Christian parallels that are there. Yeah,
there's definitely a salvation theme in that movie. That's a good one, actually.
Yeah, and I really liked too how like this sort of idea that like there's a bit of like Platonic philosophy in there that like when you're in the world of the prison, like everything is sort of dreary and gray, but you can still have a connection to music. Like that was its sort of like higher reality that it touched upon, that like that when you have that connection to music, that's what allows you to survive within this hellscape that is the prison system and actually make it like beautiful in a sort of sense. That's why I love it. Like John Dufresne in that movie is how he's just this sort of, I don't know, wanderer that he comes in and Andy Dufresne. Yeah, you're right. He's just a wanderer that just sort of comes in and sort of like brings life to this sort of like commonplace reality that's there and actually like helps people to, I don't know, build themselves up. Yeah.
He's a Christ-like figure. He's
definitely.
Yeah, that's a good answer, actually. I forgot about that. That's a lot of people's favorite movie. If you ever go look at those, like
Mhm.
those personal favorites, that's on a huge
Yeah.
bunch of lists.
Yeah. Like I said, the YouTube channel Logos Made Flesh, he does go through a lot of those sort of Christian parallels, and it is kind of surprising. But after you watch it, you're like, oh yeah, this is like kind of like really explicitly Christian in a lot of weird ways that you wouldn't really have noticed before. But it sort of takes another looking at it. All right. Did you have another movie, Caleb, that you wanted to bring up?
No, I mean there are definer movies I like, but that's fine. We can keep going.
Okay.
Of your faith. Going back as far as you remember, have you always been a theist? Has it always been the same God? Have you ever changed denomination?
So,
Oh, there we go.
there you go, Craig. There, I muted him. I will say, yeah, like I said at the beginning, I wasn't raised Catholic. I just converted this Easter. I was raised in a sort of non-denominational home, but it sort of followed a much more, I guess, like Hebraic sort of rendition of Christianity, but also done from a very Protestant lens, where like they're primarily focusing on the Bible and trying to read and connect to the Old Testament doctrines and rituals and practices and all of that. I've only like discovered recently that there's a lot of similarities to, I guess, Seventh-day Adventism. So that, like, if I were to like give somebody an idea of like how I was raised, it would be close to Seventh-day Adventism. And then yeah, I converted over to Catholicism. I know like some people have a sort of issue with saying you converted when you're like still like within Christianity. I was a Christian before and I was a Christian after. But I don't know. It's just sort of nomenclature. It's not like a significant change. It's not like I needed to be rebaptized or anything, because I was like baptized in a sort of Baptist sort of church and other non-denominational places. So yeah, that's I could go into like my journey into Catholicism, but I don't know, there's a lot of elements there and it's probably not worth it for just these questions and answer videos. But yeah.
Yeah, can you put the question back up?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've always been a theist. Yeah, I've always believed in the same God. And no, I've never changed religions or denominations.
All right. Are you here, Craig?
No, I got to go get
Okay.
groceries out of the car, so I'll be
Okay.
gone. Should I take myself off the thing so you know I'm not here, or should I just mute it?
I can take you off. Don't worry. But yeah. Then actually, yeah, maybe unjoin. That way I see once you pop back in, I can add you back to the call.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that.
All right. Thanks, Greg. Okay. We'll push play then.
If so, from what to what? Question 9. If there was one free paper or article that you think atheists should read, have a think about and respond to, what do you think it should be?
So I'm not one that usually like reads a lot of papers unless I have like some specific sort of question I have in mind that I'll like go into and read like several at a time. I don't like usually read philosophy papers for fun. But when thinking about this, I was like, there's this paper from William James, and it's not like explicitly a Christian apologetics paper or even like really philosophy of religion paper. It's an epistemology paper called The Will to Believe. And it goes into like, I don't know, I would really like it if a lot more people read that, whether you're theist or atheist, just to sort of give a more clear idea of like what you're epistemically permitted to hold to and what reasons or lack of reasons you might even be permitted to hold to a belief in the absence of evidence. That's sort of the thesis to the paper, that not all of our beliefs require some sort of evidential grounding to them. You can actually be epistemically justified to form a belief and hold to it, even in the absence of some particular piece of evidence that's favoring that. So yeah, I mean, it'll be related, I guess, to Christianity or religion in general, because it's in a sense like a way to understand faith, I guess, in some sense, but I don't think it should really be applied that generally. But I do think, at least within epistemology, it's a great paper worth looking into, and just sort of getting your ideas about whether you're more of a evidentialist, sort of like William Clifford, where there's never any instances where you're justified to believe anything in the absence of evidence, or maybe a bit more permissive like William James. I think that's a good paper worth reading.
Yeah, I don't really have a good answer on this because, like you said, it depends upon what you're interested in, and I don't really think there's just like one paper or article like, go read this and that's gonna do the trick or whatever. So, I mean, it's kind of comparing and contrasting lots of different like papers and videos and stuff. So, I mean, I would just recommend people more follow thinkers that they find to be interesting, and you'll probably find bits and pieces. But if I have to recommend something, I mean, I recommended this blog post, which I think Real Life Theology recommended it the other day as well, by Ed Fazer, called "So You Think You Understand the Cosmological Argument." And not to say everything in it is perfect or whatever, but I think he does a good job responding to some of just like the bad caricatures that some like, especially, uninformed objectors might make. So it's at least informative about, cosmological arguments. So, and that's free on his blog. So.
Yeah, that's cool. I actually just recalled, since we have an upcoming sort of debate on divine simplicity and modal collapse, there's this paper that I appreciate that was actually written by Graham Oppy back in 2003 regarding divine simplicity, where even as an atheist, he's sort of like defending like a model of divine simplicity that classical theists are sort of welcome to accepting. It's called The Devilish Complexities of Divine Simplicity. So it's got a fun title there, but it's actually pretty good. I don't know if it like his like approach to divine simplicity is like totally in agreement with like the tradition regarding it. He sort of takes almost, I think, like a nominalist approach regarding like how to defend divine simplicity. But it's like, I don't think you even have to go full nominalist. All you have to say is that there are no properties that are universal or common between God and creatures in exactly the same sort of way. And saying that like God as a simple being is just the truth maker to different truths about like how he has maximal power and knows everything. Like these are going to be two different predications that are still going to have one single truth maker that is ontologically simple. So anyway, I'm not explaining it very well, but yeah, Graham Oppy's paper, I think especially atheists that are maybe fans of modal collapse arguments against divine simplicity should give it a read, and just to at least get your ideas to, that way maybe like hopefully less people will automatically say that, oh, divine simplicity, that entails a modal collapse. Because here we have Graham Oppy, who I think he makes some good points in it. But I don't know if you've read that though, Caleb. It's pretty good. You'll probably like it too. Right.
What do you think it should be? Question 10. Which atheist channels would you recommend to your fellow theists?
You want to go first?
Yeah, so there'll be some I'll probably forget or leave off, but yeah, some good ones would be like Non-Alchemist channel, Answers in Reason, it's pretty good. Emerson's channel is pretty good. Emerson Green, and then Counter Apologist has a pretty good channel. Real Life Theology with some pretty good content. So those would be some that come to mind that I think handle philosophy and counter apologetics, or however you want to call it, from an atheist perspective in a fair-minded way.
Yeah, that's definitely a good lesson. I wish
I
had
also JB's channel, Talk with
Oh
JB.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, all those on that list, I definitely also second. I will say, like, I don't know, thinking about how the questions sort of phrase, like, which would you recommend to your fellow theists? It would really depend upon like what type of theist I'm interacting with. I definitely would say Majesty of Reason is a great channel to sort of like, whether you're theist, atheist, or agnostic, it's yeah, definitely great just to sort of look at
He's not
regarding
an
the various
atheist
topics.
channel.
Well, I mean, he is an atheist in regards to classical theism, and if you're not a classical theist, then you're an atheist, as David Bentley Hart says. So, in a sense, he is an atheist, you know. Yeah, definitely Emerson Green. Like, I find like watching or listening to Emerson Green's videos regarding specific topics, I guess confronting. Like, actually, like I don't know. I do feel like I have to wrestle with his material more than I might with like somebody like Cosmic Skeptic or Rationality Rules or something like that. I think Emerson, yeah, does provide real thoughtful content that I've actually changed my mind on. Like before, I probably would have held to a type of skeptical theism or like at least found it a plausible response. But yeah, it took a few listens to his video on skeptical theism for me to like, yeah, I mean, given other commitments I have in epistemology, this is just not going to be an adequate response to the problems of evidential evils. Because, like, well, if it seems to me that this evil has no justifying reason behind it, then that, at least prima facie, gives me justification to believe that it doesn't do so. And so I'm going to need some sort of defeater to this initial justification. And then, like, the types of defeaters that various skeptical theists will sort of respond with are just not going to be plausible, because those same defeaters would like entail a type of Cartesian skepticism about the external world, because you could theoretically have some reason to think that we have all these seemings that there is an external world, even though there is a Cartesian demon that's sort of like implanting these seemings within our minds. But the fact that that's a possibility doesn't entail that it like negates the initial justification that I have for thinking that this particular evil has no greater good that it provides somewhere further down the line. So yeah, I would say that video in particular is a good video, especially if you're like sympathetic towards skeptical theism. I think it's definitely well worth watching with a open attitude and trying to really wrestle with it. And yeah, but yeah, like your recommendations as well. I don't know if there's any others. If I think of any, I'll probably like comment them in the just in the comments below. So.
And that's the end of the 10 questions for theists video. I hope you've enjoyed answering the questions. I'm really looking forward to reading or viewing your responses. Please drop any links in the comments below this video and share it with anyone else that you think might be interested in doing a response too. Equally, if you just want to leave your answers as text in the comments, that's absolutely fine as well.
All right. I think the rest is just sort of his outro. But yeah, so those are Joe from Answers and Reasons, questions for theists. Let me see if I can start to get the Emerson's video up. Give me a second. Oh. Let me see. Share. Here we go. Video file. What were your thoughts on the questions, Caleb? Oh, you're muted. Oops. All right. Well.
Joe from Answers and Reason made a video.
Whoops. There we go. You there, Caleb?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Yeah. All right. You ready for Emerson Green's 7 questions for Christians?
Yep.
Oh, well, just noticed that we're already almost an hour. But yeah, we'll probably be able to go for another half hour. But here we go.
A short while back entitled 10 Questions for Theists, and it's a nice change of pace to be asking the questions instead of answering them, so I thought I'd ask my own questions. But first, a short preamble from Braxton Hunter of Trinity Radio.
Oh.
I can't say this about many things, but Braxton and I are in complete agreement about how these sorts of issues should be approached.
The worldview discussions space can be so combative. And when atheists and Christians come up with lists of questions that they don't think the other side can answer, those questions usually aren't genuine. I've never made a list like that, although I've responded to some. Here, I hope my atheist interlocutors will consider these questions deeply without giving glib answers. These aren't meant to be gotcha questions, though I'm not asking for no reason. I expect you will have answers, and I want to hear what the most sincere among you have to say.
Number 1.
Who created God? Just kidding. What is your credence in your version of theism? As in, what is the likelihood of theism by your lights? Assigning too specific a probability to broad metaphysical questions feels a bit silly to me personally, and for the sake of clarity, sometimes I'll say that my credence in atheism is about 0.9, but really that just translates to a high credence in atheism. I strongly agree with the statement, God probably does not exist. Now take the proposition, God exists. Are you absolutely certain that P is true? Do you strongly agree or merely agree? Where do you fall on this scale?
Right. How would you answer, Caleb?
Yeah, I would say that I'm strongly in agreement or strongly believe God exists, but not to the level of Cartesian certainty. Like, wouldn't put it at, a 10, but would put it up there at a high level of confidence.
Yeah. I think for myself, I was more, I guess, more capable in sort of working within a less than certain attitude regarding theism and other metaphysical beliefs, and I guess more open towards like pragmatic reasons for believing in God and things like that. But I don't know. Later, having a more, I guess, open attitude towards the various theistic arguments and trying to better understand like what they're trying to get at. I think I'm more confident that some sort of necessary being exists. It's say, yeah, I strongly agree, or maybe have a credence of 0.8.5, I guess. That some sort of necessary being grounds reality. And then whether I think necessary being corresponds with general sort of theistic attitude or religious beliefs regarding God within the Catholic tradition or within Christian tradition. Probably maybe a 0.7, 6.5. Yeah, I guess a 7, depending upon like what we're attributing to that necessary being. Oh, Salem has the best answer. Let's see. Wait. Oh, I clicked it twice. 9. Wow, Salem, impressive. Yeah, I'd say I strongly agree that a necessary being grounds reality, and then I'd say I agree that that being is God. Whoops. I think oh, here we go.
Where do you fall on this scale?
There we go.
What can atheists learn from your religion? As in, what can people who are not convinced of the literal truth of your metaphysical claims glean morally or spiritually from your form of Christianity? Or does one need to accept all the metaphysical claims in order to see any merit in the moral and spiritual claims?
So this is something I've only, I guess, been more interested in given my recent conversion, but I think there's a lot to be gleaned, I guess, from a sort of study of the lives of the saints within the Catholic or Orthodox tradition. And I recognize it's not going to be as plausible to the atheists, given that like most of the stories regarding the lives of the saints are sort of riddled with miracles and different things that might seem a little bit larger than life and not very plausible to be like actually like literally true. But I think like even if you take that attitude as an atheist, I think there's still a sense in which you can glean from the lives of the saints in just a sort of recognition of like, wow, these people like really had a strong fortitude of character and willing to live in a very exotic sort of way of life and even a willingness to be martyred for their beliefs. Even if I think that they're, like, if I were the atheist, even if I thought that those beliefs are false, I still can admire their character, that they had that willingness to stand up for what they believe in, even unto death and even unto torture. Like I said, though, like, they probably aren't going to buy into the more fantastical, like, descriptions of their deaths, but there's probably a lot of those that are quite true. I mean, we have a very barbaric history and a lot of needless deaths that have taken place. So I'm sure there's a lot more than what you might initially think that are probably more true than fictional. But yeah, I'd say looking into the lives of the saints, I know for Emerson especially, he might have a sort of affinity to the life of Saint Francis of Assisi, and I'm sure he'll find many implausible elements within the stories regarding Saint Francis's life, but will still at least find something to appreciate from it, I think.
Yeah,
Welcome back, Greg.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep. Yeah,
Cool.
You sound good.
Good. Because I'm in the back seat of the car now. The laptop wasn't connecting. I was here like a minute ago and I couldn't see you guys.
Gotcha. Yeah. We were just asked by Emerson, what can atheists learn from your religion without totally buying into the entirety of the metaphysical worldview?
That's a good one. Well, I mean, you can, without practicing the metaphysics at all. Remember that guy who I had on my channel like 3 weeks ago, John, that secular humanist dude?
Yeah.
That
James Croft.
right. That moral code is virtually identical to the moral code of Christianity. The, like, you sacrifice yourself for the good of the community. Your goal is to be humble and of service to the people around you. So you can still adopt the ethics and the moral code of Jesus, not necessarily all the other parts of Christianity, but that moral code has actually been very useful and instructive in Western civilization. So that's its secular utility.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think though a lot teachings of Jesus and really the New Testament as a whole. I mean, obviously there are some, verses that will be difficult and such, but yeah, I mean, I think the moral teachings of Christianity, everybody can embrace. And yeah, again, like, I mean, there are going to be some teachings that are going to be difficult if you don't buy into the metaphysics as much, but for the most part, though, the ethics of Christianity is going to be, helpful and agreeable to,
It's useful whether you believe that he's God or not. You can adopt certain paradigms like humility, service, imitate Paul as he imitates Christ, and you be more, you become humble and lovable like me, and of service to mankind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you all should. All you atheists should like read more about Jesus. That way, you can be a little bit more like Craig Reed here.
Exactly. My Christ likeness is kind of goes before me and speaks for me at this point.
Exactly. All right.
For instance, I think Paul's advice in Philippians 4:8 to meditate on the true, the good, and the beautiful is wise regardless of your opinion on God's existence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's a good point.
If your son or daughter began dating an atheist, would you be uncomfortable with that, even if they were a moral and intelligent person who truly seemed to have your child's best interest at heart?
I wouldn't be uncomfortable at all. If I thought they were a good person who actually loved my daughter, I'd be totally fine with it.
Yeah, it's funny. When I first listened to this part, I thought the question had to do with like whether your son or daughter was an atheist. How would that like change your attitude towards them? And I was actually like thinking that, yeah, even if my son or daughter were an atheist, I think there would still be a lot that I could connect to them with, because there's a way in which like I try to think about my Christianity or religiosity, even with it, I don't know, with one foot inside the atheist camp, and that like trying to understand it from the outside as well as from the inside, while still living it from the inside, but still at least being able to have a sort of outsider's perspective on it and recognize that even from an outsider's perspective, there's reasons to be live as a Christian. So yeah, so long as I thought that the person was of a moral, upstanding character, their being an atheist, I think would be I'd let them date my daughter, I guess.
Unless it was Emerson Green himself. No, no freaking
Yeah,
way.
it depends on what they look like.
Yeah,
if they happen
exactly.
to have this Adidas Russian tracksuit and long red hair.
No way. Stay
Yeah.
away from my daughter, pal.
Yeah,
But a
so I wouldn't-
theoretical atheist that loved, if I thought that they really did love my daughter and they were, had a best interest, then I'd be totally cool with it.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be uncomfortable with it, no, but I do think that relations are easier if people have the same beliefs. So I mean, I do recognize that, or at least have similar beliefs. So I do recognize that, but it wouldn't make me uncomfortable. But I mean, I do acknowledge that could be a difficulty. But anyways, let's get into all other issues.
Right. Yeah. For myself, in consideration of marriage, I wouldn't probably be interested in dating atheists unless I thought that they're, I don't know, I'd just be more interested in dating a Christian, specifically a Catholic, with the expectation there's a purpose behind dating with that, and that's the expectation for marriage. And so having a marriage where both people are simpatico in regards to their beliefs or their goals or what they value is going to be important. So yeah, it depends on how far into the dating process happened, at least even in my own considerations. And so I also had those similar considerations for my son or daughter as well. But all right.
Seemed to have your child's best interest at heart. Do you believe in eternal conscious torment? If you do, what does one have to do or not do to end up in such a state? If you don't believe in eternal conscious torment, or eternal torture, do you find it as morally insane as I do? I think eternal conscious torment is the most morally unjustifiable, demented idea that has ever been conceived by human beings. I cannot think of something worse than eternal torture, and I can't imagine any crime that would merit torture that lasted for trillions of years, let alone eternity. I mean, maybe Hitler deserves to burn for a while, but eventually you say mercy. If you don't, you're worse than him. I think many Christians underestimate how bizarre this idea is to anyone who isn't steeped in Christian culture.
All right. Now he's playing hardball.
Yeah, he's preaching atheism instead of asking us questions. He's debating us.
No, it's a good question though. Especially for Emerson, this is his very much something that's important to him, and so yeah, I can definitely understand it. If that's your sort of understanding of what Christianity is, I definitely probably be inclined towards atheism myself as well. All right, so I'll probably have the strictest understanding of hell than maybe the other people in the chat. I think that an eternal existence absent God would be filled with a sort of frustration and dissatisfaction, and it would not be pleasant to live with this sort of under this sort of existence. So yeah, I would sort of take a C.S. Lewisian route in saying that gates of hell are locked from the inside, but also that it's not so much God is sending us to a place in which we're tortured forever, but rather that to exist without having God as sort of our highest ideal, and living and respecting that highest ideal is going to just mean a sort of internal
gnawing.
Yeah.
And
well,
that's how it's gnashing of teeth. It's without Yeah, I understand where you're going with that.
Yeah. Anyway,
I
yeah.
like that.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis has this short book, The Great Divorce, that I think is like at least even if you think that like hell is a implausible or immoral sort of nightmare that no greatest conceivable being would ever subject somebody to, I think that at least The Great Divorce manages to maybe like soften that sort of ardent sense that you might have regarding hell. So I think that like it's funny. I debated Sam Watkinson and also John DePew on their channel, or John DePew's channel, regarding universalism and also libertarian freedom. And there's this, I guess, sort of point that I think I have, at least as a question for the universalist, is that like, well, does God force somebody through character reformulation? Like, is it the case that God would force somebody unwillingly to revise their character so that they could be
In
more
heaven, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
what
exactly.
is Hitler? In order for Hitler to be in heaven, there's an implication that he's willing to now follow the kingdom's rules, the kingdom of heaven, and be good and loving, and be like me or Caleb, and compassionate like all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get where you're going with that too. I think those are good answers.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say that I think universalism is going to be able to be coherently fit to the traditional understanding within at least some forms of Christianity, so long as you incorporate a strong enough understanding of purgatory. Like, you could say that, yeah, everyone does eventually go to heaven, but for some people, they're going to be restrained against it.
Hitler's like, it's taken a really long time, God.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. And there is still going to be a strong sense of like suffering and torment that happens after death if you're not in the correct if you're not in the appropriate attitude towards the divine. And it's going to take a lot of work to go through that. But I think even for that sort of universalist understanding, it raises the question of whether God can force somebody to revise their character in that sort of purgatory. And if God can't do that, like, it would be immoral for God to like change somebody's will, because then it wouldn't be them willing something. It would be God willing for them, which does seem kind of odd, or does seem like there could be some moral objections.
In other words, there's no neutral gray people, like just an atheist winds up burning forever because he doesn't believe. It's people who are actively hateful and evil. It's similar to what I believe in some ways. Only the truly wicked wind up in a place of torment, and it's partially of their own volition, in that there are degrees of evil. Even in Nazi Germany, there were Nazis who were just kind of like regular soldiers who, if they had the right circumstances, were somewhat redeemable. And then there was absolute pure evil, like a Heinrich Himmler. And yeah, I can't imagine God forcing him to like become part of a decent society against his will. That makes a lot of sense to me. But Caleb, go ahead. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
So I don't hold to eternal conscious torment, but as John knows, maybe Craig, I hold to kind of like a hybrid view. So I have a discussion on my channel on that, also with Sam and what's his name, Palamite Christian. So anyways, I'd recommend people watch that, but for fuller elaboration. But no, I don't think God would torment somebody forever. But and I am a hopeful universalist, but I don't think like certain universalism is something I don't think we can know with certainty. So I don't know. That's just the answer in short.
Do you want to sort of lay out your characterization of hell just for a second? Like, you refer to it as semi-annihilationism, I think.
Yeah, and it's just like a theory that it's not like I'm committed to it dogmatically, but it's just a way, like if somebody feels like the tradition pulls in lots of different ways, I think you can kind of embrace like the different aspects of each. Like if you could be a hopeful universalist, like you hope everyone's going to be saved, but if somebody's not, because God respects their will and that person's just totally opposed to union with God, then I don't think God would, or at least it's plausible, God wouldn't annihilate the person because if you think like that's not part of tradition and it's against God's loving character, but then I imagine hell is more like than like a sort of dream-like state. Like the person's not annihilated, but it doesn't mean it's thereby an eternal conscious state. It's more like a dream-like kind of state. And so it is still eternal separation from God, but it's not annihilation, but it's also not torture. Anyways, that's just a way somebody could hold to all views without, in a way. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's similar to like C.S. Lewis's type view, except that I think there are some difficulties with Lewis's view, which I don't need to get into right now. But basically, it's just important to recognize there are different ways you can imagine hell without committing to that it's literal torture. And how to interpret the biblical text is very debatable. So I don't think it's going to give us a clear source of like, oh, how literal is the Bible being, and there's different ways to understand it. But anyways.
Right. Yeah.
One who isn't steeped in Christian culture. Why can't we be saved after our deaths? Why do we have to get the right answer in this life? Doesn't that seem pretty arbitrary? More would certainly be saved if we could make a decision after we're presented with better evidence of God's existence and clearer information about what God wants from us. Doesn't God will all to be saved?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's definitely especially good in responding to a lot of sort of common practice Protestant understandings of hell, and I'm sure Catholics as well. As for me, I think that like Lumen Gentium has elaborated quite a bit, has elaborated how we should sort of understand the opportunities for salvation, even absent a sort of explicit knowledge or belief in God or in the Christian God or as Jesus Christ as their Savior. But yeah, within Lumen Gentium from Vatican II, I think that's a very useful resource for Catholics, at least, in sort of laying out a way in which, like, even talks about how even the Muslim or the unbeliever can be part of the plan for salvation, so long as they had a sense of charity within their heart and a desire that if God were to exist, that they be united with God and in a sort of submissive response. And like what Emerson brought up earlier, how even if you're an atheist, you can have a sort of commitment to the true, the good, and the beautiful and devote your life to that, even without having an explicit like belief or even an explicit rejection in belief of as God is that sort of true, good, and beautiful. And so there's I think there's a rational hope that those that do have this sort of commitment to what's true, what's good and beautiful, and a willingness to seek that out and to live your life according to that, that there can be a rational hope that they will be saved, even without being in explicit, visible connection to the church. Or being explicitly a Christian or anything like that. But
right, so to follow up on that, like that's where I don't think it's really necessary for somebody to be saved after their life because God knows that person's condition as it is. Like under our theology, and when I say our, I mean the Catholic theology, that God judges people based on how they're responding given their culpability. So it's not, did this person become an explicit Christian or Catholic? It's just, is that person not actively rejecting God's truth knowingly? Like God's going to know somebody's culpability. So if he knows that this isn't, like what you were saying, like it's God judges their moral state and their pursuit of an openness to what's true. So they don't need to be saved after their life because they're sort of mysteriously, mystically already being saved without knowing it in this life. So it's not to say that, we don't encourage people to convert, and, but, God will judge people fairly, and he knows that.
Yeah, I agree with both of those things.
Yeah.
Both what you guys said. That's one of those things I was talking about, that I'm sort of agnostic on that. I mean, I can see, as I weigh it out, it's just going to be fair. If there's a Hindu who's on his deathbed, it's not like God sentences people to hell in a technicality. That doesn't make sense to me. Oh, you were born, I didn't even know who you were. I never heard of you. Oh, too bad. You lose. It's like you're judged on the moral weight of your life. Were you a good person? Did you act in ways that were, of service to human beings? Obviously, you made mistakes, but I think it's going to be fair around the boards for everybody. So I don't necessarily think you need to be saved after you die. Maybe God shows up and speaks to your heart right before you die. Who knows? I don't really need the answers.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Yeah, even within Scripture, there's the verse in Matthew 7:21-23 about how there'll be those that think that they're like united to Christ, and so that they've earned their sort of spot in salvation due to like what they've done or how they've like appeared to mankind.
Right, and he said, "Depart from me, you workers of iniquity," because they were actually doing evil and bringing harm to the name of God, because they were such terrible human beings.
Yeah. So and then on the flip side, there's the other people that didn't even have this sort of explicit knowledge. It seems like Lord, where was it that you were and I fed you and clothed you, and you were naked and I clothed you? It does seem like it would be a surprise to them that they are able
we're helping God the whole time because they're doing good deeds, and they're not. Either way, though, it's not Emerson Green, so I don't know where either way.
That's my most basic soteriology is whatever allows Emerson for all the good people and not Emerson Green
either way
to go to heaven. Him and Chris Rhodes definitely.
Well, Chris Rhodes is probably helping handicapped kids and building orphanages and stuff. I would think.
No, you must not know him very well then.
Oh, he's not. All right, never mind.
It's more like pushing handicapped kids down and then making fun of them.
Making fun of their infirmities. Exactly. Wow, that's too bad.
Yeah. Well, hey, he's got to go somewhere. Okay, so that's what.
Yeah, exactly.
But okay, so there was something regarding his question, why can't we be saved after our deaths? That I'm not so sure the baptism of desire that's sort of used within Catholic circles is going to be perfect fit to, say, babies who are who die in a state before baptism or anything like that. Because I don't think it's obvious that the baby has a sort of implicit desire to be united with God, because the baby doesn't have any sort of propositional attitudes at that point.
Right, it's an atheist. It doesn't believe.
And so, well, atheists.
No, it's a whole big.
Yeah.
What about with rocks, John? Do you think?
Yeah, dare we hope that all the rocks shall be saved. And so, it does seem like maybe there is this sort of opportunity for the babies that were born, that died in a state, not even with an implicit or explicit belief or appropriate connection to the sacraments, that they will be saved after death. And now I know that's going to be still somewhat controversial, because there's different open attitudes to take within Catholic tradition regarding the unbaptized infants, whether they're in a sort of natural good, they're able to inherit a sort of natural good in limbo, or that there's some way
innocent.
in which
they're totally innocent of all moral culpability whatsoever.
Right.
That's why the age of accountability makes sense to me, because even a 16-year-old is somewhat innocent of moral culpability until you're I don't know, maybe 25. How old are you, John? Until you're
whatever above, whatever's underneath whatever. I'm 24, so.
25. So you're.
Oh, I can still sin then. Oh, perfect. No. Like we said earlier, God is going to judge us in accordance with what we have available or what we have access to at our position and time. And so it seems especially for babies, it's not like they've committed any mortal sins. And so yeah, I don't know. There is that question there, I think, in regards to the question that Emerson brings up about like whether it's possible that some shall be saved after death, and whether that would apply to, say, like a baby that dies in a sort of neutral state of no sin or anything like that. What are your sort of thoughts on that, Caleb?
Well, I don't want to get off on something that's not as related, but I mean, yeah, I think that any baby is going to be saved, but I mean, the way that you framed it, I mean, you said, what about if they're not baptized? But I mean, if they are baptized, then they're saved, but they didn't. I feel like the question applies regardless. But anyways, it's a different rabbit hole. We'll get into another time. I don't want to get trapped.
Yeah, I guess there is also the, like, for a baby that dies in the womb, there's still the hope that they're saved, and it's a rational hope, given that, like, we have this understanding of baptism of desire. And so if they're going to be saved on the basis of their parents' desires for that child, then, like, even then. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of other elements there, but and his question is probably more specific to, like, people that live to adulthood without being visibly connected to the church at all.
Right.
All right. Yeah.
In your mind, what's the second most plausible religion or non-religion after Christianity? If you became convinced Christianity was untrue, what would you be?
How would you respond to this, Caleb?
I don't really think another religion would be plausible, but I still think it would be reasonable to believe in God. So probably some kind of perennialism, like, you know, there's some truth in all religious systems. Maybe, you know, God is working in them, but none of them is like dogmatically true. I think it's probably the most plausible perspective to me if I didn't think Christianity was true.
Is that
I
sort of the
mean, I
same for
guess
you?
Judaism. I mean, I guess Judaism, but I don't know if I found Christianity not true. I don't think I would find Judaism plausible either. So yeah, I would probably just be more just like a theism, perennialism.
Genera God.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. Also, Taoism has a lot of inherent plausibility just because of like physics, and you could even argue that the Higgs boson is like the energy that permeates all of reality is kind of what the Tao actually is. So it's already pretty plausible. And Brahman, depending on how you define it, if you define Brahman as a being, or like there's ways you can use Brahman as a Tao like energy that permeates all of reality. It's surprisingly similar to, you know, some of the things going on in physics, if not completely compatible with it.
Right.
So plausible.
As for me, I like, at least if it would depend on like how much I changed my mind. Because like if I for some reason thought that the dogmas of the Catholic Church were incorrect, I'd probably just become an Eastern Orthodox Christian. And then from there, if I thought that, like, I don't know, the doctrines within Eastern Orthodoxy were untrue, I'd probably become a sort of more neutral, non-denominational, maybe evangelical, or maybe even a sort of Kierkegaardian sort of lone Christian, that sort of thing, where like you have to sort of recognize your faith within a church of one or something like that. But like he said, what most plausible religion or non-religion after Christianity? So like going down the scales of like, if I came to disbelieve in Christianity as a whole, like either by disbelieving in like Christian theism, I don't know. I'm still like sort of captivated, I guess, by this sort of Christian attitude. I would probably be a sort of like secular Christian, in the sense that like I'd want to live life as a Christian somewhat, despite like buying into the metaphysics behind it. So I'd probably be something like a religious fictionalist or something like that, or maybe somebody that like sees the secular utility to Christianity, or even just the personal utility to living within a sort of metaphysical framework of Christianity. So yeah, I think like if I were to like not be Christian, I would just be a atheist version of Christian or something like that, which I don't think is a loophole, but I don't know. I don't know. That's at least how I sort of live my life as
a Christ-like atheist. That's what
yeah,
you would
exactly. Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah, like Albert Camus, I think he said something to the akin to like the best way to live a life is to live as a saint, but like which is sort of hard to do as an atheist or something like that. I'm totally butchering that, but like I don't know, something like Albert Camus, who has a great appreciation for the Christian tradition, while finding himself in a sort of position that's hard or impossible for him to actually believe that God exists in the more metaphysically speculative sort of sense that Christians are so willing to buy into. But yeah,
that makes sense.
Right.
Christianity was untrue, what would you be?
Final question.
And finally, what are the
theist.
best arguments for each side? What's the best argument for theism? And of the arguments for atheism, is there one that seems more convincing to you than the rest? For example, Schellenberg's argument from hiddenness, Rowe's evidential argument from evil, the meager moral fruits of theism, evolutionary suffering, teleological evil, Draper's evidential argument from pain and pleasure, animal suffering, doxastic discord, the problem of heaven, Oppe's argument from naturalism, etc. I think a cumulative case is the best each side has to offer, but I still have my favorite individual argument.
So yeah, sort of two questions there. What do you think is the best argument for theism, and which of the arguments for atheism do you find most plausible or somewhat convincing? I'll say for myself, I find, I guess, a sort of like general cosmological argument regarding either the possibility for the non-existence of certain things or the dependency that they have on other things, and then a sort of recognition that that sort of chain of dependency cannot go on to infinity or have some sort of circular causation that takes place, or even just like how you can have a dependent thing that exists independently is a contradiction. So yeah, I think that there must be something that exists of itself, sort of something that like puts a stop to the chain of dependent beings so that they have something that they can depend upon, what they depend upon for their ultimate existence. So yeah, I guess a sort of general argument for a cosmological argument that might be like somewhat derivative of the De Ante argument. But I also think that the argument for motion is useful in at least showing that, yeah, things that undergo a change are not going to be able to be reduced to the way that they are in this particular moment. So there must be something beyond what they are in this particular moment. And that sort of thing is not going to be able to be explained by themselves. And so, yeah, you're going to have this similar sort of like problem of an infinite chain or a circular chain or a finite chain that is ultimately grounded in some sort of non-changeable object or non-contingent object or non-dependent object. And then like from there, trying to run some sort of stage 2 argument for why this particular object might have certain theistic attributes. So yeah, I would say that that sort of line of argumentation I find most convincing.
Yeah, I would say some version of the contingency argument is going to be most convincing to me for theism, and then for atheism, some sort of argument from natural evil, like evolutionary argument from evolutionary suffering, probably going to be the most challenging.
Yeah.
I would agree that the teleological is that the one with the evolutionary evil, like the one that I think Ben Watkins used when he was debating Trent Horn. I think that's the most. But the thing I was saying is I don't think it's necessarily an argument so much as an intuition. Like if you're an atheist and you ever find yourself like, you know, doubting, going like starting, oh, maybe God does exist. And you just start thinking of all these animals that have lived and died and suffered. 10,000 years before human was ever there. Like, what kind of a
Mhm.
weird system is that for God to oversee? I get why that's really compelling to an atheist. I think that's the most, but I don't know if it works as an argument.
Yeah. So that's
Because
interesting. Like, could it maybe be a sort of non-inferential judgment that they make, where it's not like they're using these 2 or 3 different sort of premises that they're sort of stringing along to form a conclusion, but rather this immediate experience of, I don't know, this gazelle
well,
being
yeah,
torn
because
apart
it
by
makes
lions, and then
literally
that,
like
like, oh, yeah,
yeah, because it literally makes zero sense to somebody, like why God would do it that way. Like, I can see why that's completely almost nonsensical, but the reason why it doesn't work as an argument, because if there is a God, then that's the way God did it. It's just that simple. I mean, that's not necessarily a great answer, but that would be the answer. So you can't really loop these into, it's really hard to loop them into God does not exist. You can pump them up as intuitions so that they're really compelling to you personally, but they don't quite get you to, like, I think that's the strongest of them. I think that makes sense what I just said. I think it did.
I think it makes sense, but I've commented on this before that I do think it's an argument. It may not be a deductive, like geometric disproof, and like pretty much no argument in philosophy is going to work that way. But any sort of inference somebody makes and says like, well, this is a plausible
Right. So okay, so it'd
intuition.
be an
I
inference to the
still think
best
that's
explanation.
okay.
Like
I
the
still
best
think that's an
explanation.
argument, though.
Right.
Like I think there could be a plausible response to it, but I think that it's still an argument. It's just somebody could evaluate it differently. It's
Yeah.
just not a geometric proof, but almost nothing in philosophy is going to work like that, where it's going to be like axiomatic and like no rational person could find any disagreement or a different way to evaluate it.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. The best argument for is the argument from religious experience that I've been working on, because that's how I became a Christian. When you go and you have an experience that's really real and compelling to you, you're basically faced with no other option but either believe what you experienced, believe what happened, or go with your ideological commitments prior to that experience. And when you have religious experiences, you can cultivate them and amplify them so that they become 100 times more real and compelling and convincing to you. So even if you're an atheist and you think God doesn't exist, you know that a religious experience happens, and you've had like a small low resolution one, like you go to a concert, you can amplify that experience and intensify it. And yes, maybe it is just your subconscious talking, but the more you amplify that, the more it starts to seem like God. I don't know if that completely made sense the way I said it right now, but that's the argument that I've been working on my channel for the last
yeah.
months.
No, it's great because like it's kind of interesting because there is a sort of similarity between the two, where like you have a sort of intuitional experience of either God, of like the spiritual reality that you recognize that like, oh, this is not coming from me, and it's much greater than I am.
Right.
So that gives me a sort of like internal justification to believe that yeah, God does exist. And then similar to that, the atheist, they might look out at the world and observe a young fawn being torn apart by coyotes. And then they'll be like, oh man, like if there was a maximally great being, this is not like what I
Why
would
would
imagine.
that happen?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, exactly. And it would have the same sort of like immediate sort of impression upon them. And I think like sometimes these sort of like theistic arguments are very much outside of our scope of like common practice or experience, and so it's hard to sort of wrap your head around. And from that, I think we should appropriately have a bit of skepticism towards that. But yeah, these sorts of things like a religious experience or an experience of something occurring within nature, I think they probably should tilt the scales a lot more. And so yeah, the theist will need to respond.
Well, you also have like what I think it ultimately boils down to. This is I'm just throwing this out here now. I've been thinking about it. But as a what intuitions do you cultivate, and do you actively double down on and amplify in your own life? Because like that's what I meant with the theological evil thing. You can start tripping yourself out. Back when I was an agnostic, I could trip myself out for like 5, 6, 7 hours on like the troubles of the world for like 10 hours straight and not
Yeah.
sleep and get all angst-ridden. And of course, you're going to come to the conclusion there is no God. There can't be, because look at all this, But then when you do it the way I'm doing it now, you're cultivating like peace and tranquility, and you're participating in cultivating a different intuition. I think that made sense. That made sense, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Oh, Kathy coming in clutch with the quote from Albert Camus' The Plague. I guess it's like a piece of dialogue between two characters. In short, Thoreau said simply, "What interests me is to know how one becomes a saint." But you don't believe in God. Precisely. Can one become a saint without God? That is the only concrete question that I know today. Yeah, that's from the Plague. So yeah, if I were to like not become a Christian, I would be sort of take that sort of
You'd be a saint-like atheist, an atheist who practices Christ-likeness.
an atheist that wishes to live as a saint, because obviously being a saint is part of the human experience. And so like, what can one do to become a saint? And maybe that requires religious practice, and whether that type of strict religious practice can be efficacious, I guess, even without the explicit knowledge of or belief in God, that would be a sort of open question. I think that would be worth looking into, and like how to sort of develop that practice even as a atheist would be something worth I don't know, devoting your life to as an atheist.
Yeah, that's actually that's for Vakey Land, and that's what that guy we had on my channel. That's all in that same sort of territory. Recognize the value of religious commitments and values without actually holding to the I guess the metaphysical beliefs, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like I'll agree with both of you guys. I think that the best argument that atheism has is a type of evidential argument from natural suffering of creatures given a long evolutionary span of history. I think that's just very confronting to the theist, and I think it's reasonable. Like, it makes a lot of sense of why Christians would sort of like try to deny this sort of element to our scientific history, not only because it conflicts with our sort of Christian narrative regarding the beginning of the world, at least on a prima facie level, but also because it does sort of like run against our common intuitions about like how a perfect being would go about creating our world. Now I think, I don't know, there are some plausible theodicies that will manage to respond to that, like Caleb's perfect will theodicy, I think, manages to respond to that. And the one that I'm at least finding most plausible right now is a sort of like participation theodicy, where like God's generosity is sort of like what motivates him to allow even fallible creatures to contribute towards the perfection of the world, even if they do so imperfectly, so that God can just sort of like use that meager sort of contribution that they do of their own natural capacities, and then slowly sort of shape that towards a perfect world. That way, even the smallest of creatures can have a
spiritual journey.
Yeah, well, not just a spiritual journey, but like they actually did manage to contribute towards the world that we now live within. Like the fact that you and I have a sort of evolutionary history connected to the actions and behaviors of like.
Well, there's even some scriptural justification for that. We are co-creators with God, and we are co-rulers with God. So the moral condition of the world that we see as pertains to human beings is partially our fault and partially our responsibility. That's clear in Christianity.
Right, and that's certainly the case. Like if you look at it from a secular level, even that like human beings are definitely not using their time the best way that they could be, in both in how they treat other human beings, but also how they treat animals. But I think we can't just place the blame entirely on the willful, sinful acts of human beings, because there's all this sin and suffering that has taken place prior to the existence of rational human souls and their embodied existence as human beings. And so I think that some sort of contribution theodicy, where even the microbes and the bacteria and the single-celled organisms and all these other things have some sort of contribution that they partake in in the bringing about of some great world that God is trying to bring about. Because God could like instantaneously bring about this magnificent world all by himself.
Right.
But
The only thing I'm pointing out is there's scriptural justification for what you're saying. There's
somewhat,
like,
yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there could be some things that could be like, yeah, this sort of idea is here. And I
creation
do think,
itself groans in anticipation
yeah,
for the
yeah,
day
exactly.
when the sons of God will be revealed. And that creation, that's why when Caleb first was talking about his theodicy, when I heard him talking about it on, like, I think Skylar's channel originally, I was like, hey, wait a minute, this has actually got a lot of merit to it, because there's a through line in the Bible that we are helping to bring about the perfect world, and then the laws of nature correspond accordingly, and God can then heal and bring about, there's a lot of messages like that in the Bible,
Yeah. Yeah, and I just think that, like, God as a maximally great being would maybe be motivated by allowing fallible creatures to be able to participate in the bringing about of some great world, even if it does mean that that great world isn't initially instantiated, just because, well, in order for it to be instantiated through the cooperation of creatures, then some sort of less than ideal world will have to be instantiated first, so that the
Right.
creatures within that world can bring about the greater world. And then you could just sort of run that same line of argumentation downwards. Well, if this is a world that would be it would be worth it for God to create, and it would be a world that creatures could contribute towards, then, well, maybe God's going to instead create the world that creatures could contribute towards, so that we could get this better world, which does mean, in fact, God would have a reason, at least, behind creating a much less than ideal world, one where there's very little contribution of creatures taking place, just so that there could be some contribution through every stage in the bringing about of the greater world. But it's a sort of complicated argument, and I haven't really formulated it very well, but that's, I guess, the general gist of it. Like, how I think that even in the face of all of the evolutionary sufferings that takes place, there are going to be routes that the theist can find plausible and be rationally justified in believing so, without having to go down a sort of skeptical theist route, or sort of beholden to a position that, like, oh, well, every single act of animal suffering actually contributes in some way towards some greater good down the line. We don't have to say that. I think, yeah, if we can avoid saying that, just because you're sort of like postulating things ad hocly, and like, we see no connection between the suffering of a fawn dying in a forest fire and, I don't know, one additional soul going to heaven. There's doesn't seem to be any plausible causal connection there between the two. And even if there was a causal connection, God being omnipotent, he could just have that additional soul go to heaven without that animal dying in the forest fire. But anyway, there's different ways to talk about to go over these sorts of arguments. But yeah. Anyway, I think that's it. Let's see. What does Emerson say?
So thank you for listening. I've been Emerson Green, and I'll see you next time.
All right. Well, thank you, Emerson Green. And thank you to Answers in Reason and Joe for the list of questions. Yeah, these were great. I think a lot of good discussion took place. I do notice that, just a little under an hour and 50 minutes. But yeah, I thought that was really good.
Yeah, it was fun. I was bouncing in and out because of the connection problems, but it was fun.
Yeah. Any last words to sign off with, Caleb? You're muted.
Oh, so no, thanks for having me.
Yeah. It was a lot of fun. Oh, we have Emerson in chat. Thanks for answering. I greatly enjoyed it. Well, thank you, Emerson, for putting out the video. Yeah, it was a good
Who do you think
question.
we destroyed more thoroughly, Emerson or Answers from Reason?
I feel like Answers in Reason was being a lot more softball in their questions than Emerson was.
Yeah. His questions are more like, let's start a conversation.
Yeah.
Emerson's
yeah,
are like, let me prove to you why God does not exist with my question.
Yeah, let me put your feet to the fire, just like you intend to put my feet to the fire as an atheist in hell. So yeah, a good little back and forth there. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, thanks everyone in the chat who's joined us. Cafe, Spartan Theology, Emerson. I think there was a couple. Salem was in here for a bit. Yeah, thanks everybody. You have a good night.
So cool.